And to break this all down, we are pleased to be joined by our panel tonight. Kyron Skinner, Fox News contributor. Jamil Jaffer, assistant professor of law at George Mason University at the Scalia School of Law over there. And Nell Gardner, former senior advisor to Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher and director at the Heritage Foundation. Welcome to all of you. I want to begin with you, Kyron. We were talking earlier in the broadcast about this idea of figuring out how the country moves forward and what impact the U.S. could have. You heard the president say we're going to run it. I think what he may have been suggesting is we want to make sure that during this transition, the right type of leader is installed, not just any leader who might lead us right back down the pathway that led us to this point. Do I have that right?
You do, but, I understand the sentiment of trying to figure out what Trump meant when he said we will run the country. But I think we need to just take a moment and realize that the U.S. government has done something in the last 24 hours that no one really thought possible. Many at home, detractors of President Trump, and adversaries around the world. Together in a very short period of time, probably a matter of weeks, if not just the fall of 2025, the U.S. military and the diplomats at the State Department, the intelligence community, the full interagency worked to plan a flawless removal of Maduro from government. And that suggests that the U.S. has the capacity to bring that kind of discipline and thought to this temporary leadership that it plans to take in Caracas. And so I think we just have to understand this is not something that was done without extreme discipline and coordination. And I expect that to happen in what will be the next phase. But we're moving so quickly to the next phase without understanding what Washington has achieved under President Donald Trump, and without understanding that you don't have this kind of outcome without a big idea. And the idea has to have a place at the table. And Donald Trump brought the idea forward of hemispheric defense without U.S. global dominance, which he says he doesn't want in the national security strategy. All of this is going to be worked out in the days and weeks ahead.
Outstanding.
I'm confident of it.
Yeah, outstanding points there. Now, let me bring you into the conversation as well. I think messaging is also an element here, especially if you are a dictator in Cuba or over in Nicaragua, or even if you are part of the I'll just call it for what it is, the triumvirate of nations that helped to prop up a dictator in Venezuela. I'm looking at you, China, and Iran, and Russia.
Yeah, thanks, Kevin. I do think that President Trump's actions have clearly put America's enemies on notice, actually, and it has instilled fear into the enemies of the free world. And that, of course, includes the likes of Cuba, Iran, also the Colombian regime as well, which is mentioned by President Trump today. In addition to that, I would say that this has been a real humiliation, of course, for China and for Russia. After all, both Beijing and Moscow saw the Maduro regime basically as a client regime, a puppet regime, actually. And so this has been a devastating blow, I think, to both China and Russia as well. And that's a very good thing. After all, of course, Venezuela has the world's biggest oil reserves. China is the world's biggest importer of oil. And with the United States now stepping into a leadership role in Venezuela, this greatly undermines China's strategic interest, actually, in the Western hemisphere. So this is a very, very smart move by President Trump. It's a real game changer, and it gives the United States a great additional leverage, actually, within the Western hemisphere, and it fantastically undermines communist China.
No, I think you nail it, especially from an economic perspective. And it's not just China, as I think you would agree. You also have to consider, as you point out, how the Iranians and the Russians will be impacted by the changes in the global oil market, the energy markets. Even Canada, you start talking about heavy heavy crude. That changes, I think, things with respect to even trade negotiations there, perhaps. So there are a number of stakeholders who will be probably, I think I could argue successfully, potentially greatly impacted by what has happened here. Let me welcome Professor Jaffer into the conversation. There will be people, Professor, who will say the U.S. went overboard. They went over the line here. This is not legal, what has happened here. You heard the president earlier today suggest this was really about bringing to justice someone who had already been previously indicted. Can you sort of help break it down from a legal perspective for us? Is this administration on solid footing?
Sure, Kevin. Well, look, obviously, Nicolas Maduro was indicted 5 years ago by the U.S. on drug charges, drug conspiracy charges and the like. So there's no surprise here. They did file a superseding indictment that added some new facts, added his wife, added his son, a couple of vice presidents. But the fact of the matter is that Nicolas Maduro has long been a fugitive from justice. He's not the legitimate leader of Venezuela. It does appear, though, that there's now rumors going around that this may have been part of a negotiated exit to give Maduro top cover to leave, with the U.S. going in and taking him out. We'll see whether that was true and that plays out over the next few days. But in any event, Nicolas Maduro out of Venezuela is a good thing for the United States. It's a good thing for our national security. But don't be surprised if President Trump's base is frustrated. They didn't elect President Trump thinking he was going to go into Venezuela and conduct regime change, which is what this is. They didn't think he was going to go into Iran and attack the nuclear program. Both of those are wins for the United States, but it's not necessarily what the Trump base was looking for. So we'll see how the base responds to this. He is getting support from even the most MAGA members of Congress, save Marjorie Taylor Greene. So we'll see how this plays out politically for the president, but it's the right thing to do. It's the right thing for our country, and it is absolutely legal. The United States does have a right to go after and get criminals and act in its own self-defense. That's what happened here.
And I'm glad you said self-defense, too, because when people talk about, well, it's just drugs or it's narco transport, the facts are these. Americans, by the hundreds of thousands, are dying because of this scourge, and that is a national security risk, to say nothing of the malign players in the region, if we want to call it the Monroe Doctrine or call it the Trump Doctrine. There's certainly a number of reasons to go there. And I also think people will say, listen, this guy was not elected democratically, so less perhaps a regime change and more of a removal of someone who ought not have been there. But, you know, potato, potato. Great stuff as always, Professor. And all of you, Niles and, of course, Kyron, thank you all for your tremendous contributions tonight. And we appreciate that. Jonathan, over to you.